I'll give you a very brief background to where we've come from in terms of the university rankings and the BRICS rankings that were published late last night and you have this morning. Times Higher Education has been on an incredible journey. We were founded in 1971 as primarily a UK-focused print publication. But actually, when we published our world rankings for the first time in 2004, it really has revolutionized our business. We've become global. We have offices all across the world. And we've really become focused on data and analytics, giving the universities the tools they need with data, as well as content and debate, to help them understand themselves, understand their position in the world, understand the changing world. So rankings have become this extraordinary phenomenon. When we publish the rankings, the world takes notice. 28 million unique visitors come to our website every year. 5 million unique page views in the first week of the publication of the rankings. There were almost 20,000 posts on social media, more than 2,500 mainstream newspaper articles in those first few days when the rankings come out. And across all of the media, there was a piece of research that was done that we're reaching hundreds of millions of individuals through mainstream media, through social media, through the way the rankings touch so many people across the entire world. They're a huge phenomenon shaping how we see the world. Why have they become such a big deal? Well, Ben Wildowski talked about the human nature, the desire to rank. We need to go far back in human history, he said, to the caveman era. We must never forget that Homo sapiens is a tribal primate. We love pecking orders that help us understand who's up and who's down. This is why somewhere in the midst of time, rankings man was born. It's rankings man over here, rankings man here, but here's my modern version of rankings man, the university president, very conscious of where they stand in rankings. It's more than just human nature, though. We're actually seeing a really profound change in global higher education that's powering rankings. Student mobility is dramatically increasing. 5 million students study outside their home countries today. The figure is expected to rise to 8 million. You look at the diaspora for Africa, for example, many tens and tens of thousands of students have to study abroad. We're seeing it across the world as the massification of higher education grows, as supply and demand is changing. So rankings are informing student decision-making all over the world. But rankings are also helping governments understand the policy landscape. You know, this conference is supported by Russia's 5100 project. The Russian government have put rankings at the heart of the economic growth strategy, at the heart of national competitiveness. We've seen that happening in China, in Japan, across the world. I think there's about 40 individual excellence initiatives, about, I think the figure was $40 billion invested in these sorts of excellence initiatives across countries across the world. Rankings are becoming a geopolitical indicator informing public debate. And they're also, of course, helping universities set their strategy, set their performance. They're being built into central decision-making processes of universities. Quite rightly, universities need data to understand themselves, to understand their position in the world. So there's a huge amount of weight riding on rankings. They've got this incredible power and influence. So we, as rankings, as the data providers, have to become accountable, transparent, and we have to work with you. We have three main sources of data. We have our academic reputation survey, which we carry out every year. We have our institutional data portal, where Times Higher Education is gathering a vast amount of information on universities all across the world. And we work with Elsevier to look at the bibliometric data. We'll look at these aspects one by one. The reputation survey data that Duncan and his team can carry out. For the last rankings in September, we gathered 250,000 items of data on more than 3,000 universities. We were able to draw on survey responses from 20,830 individuals around the world. I'm just going to ask Duncan to talk a little bit about how we actually conduct that survey, because I know it's provocative and quite controversial. Duncan, can you talk a bit about the survey itself?
Thank you. Our academic reputation survey is very much designed to be a survey of practicing academics and to give an overview of their perception of the strengths of universities. We base the survey on published academics within the Scopus dataset. And we do it through random sampling. So of all the authors on Scopus, we randomly select people to be sent the survey. You can't ask for the survey, you can't be nominated to receive the survey, the selection is random. But because we know that we want to reflect opinion across the world, we make sure that those surveys are sent out randomly but distributed according to the proportion of researchers that are present in each country. And we use data from OECD to enable us to do that. And when we do that, we find a reasonably good match. But we still find there are some countries where our response rates don't stand up as well as others. For example, when we survey in North America, high response rates. When we perform the same survey and send out the same number of surveys to China, we get much lower response rates. Not surprising. Natures of those societies. So in order to ensure that the survey is demographically correct, we rebalance. We actually upweight votes from countries where there are insufficient responses. Although we don't directly try and balance for subjects, we do keep a close eye to make sure that we have a reasonable representation of the 8 broad subject areas that we cover. We ask 2 simple questions. Which are the best universities in the world for research? And which are the best universities in the world for teaching? And what we find is that people are very open about the universities that they are willing to support. Over 3,500 higher education institutions received votes this year, including for the first time, and I'm so proud of this, it's unbelievable, the Antarctic Survey organization, which was great because it means I've finally got all 7 continents in something I've done. It's taken me a long time to achieve that. So we see some very interesting data from that, and we will talk a little bit about that later on.
So the other data source is our bibliometric data, and very briefly to discuss the power of that data, we have Wim from Elsevier.
Okay, so I would like to talk about the bibliometric part of the rankings. And the bibliometric source for these rankings are based on the Scopus dataset. So what I would like to do is tell more about what this Scopus dataset entails. So in total, there's 66 million items in Scopus. They're coming from serial titles, they're coming from conferences, and they're coming from books. And the most prolific content that we have in the Scopus database is actually from journals. So almost 22,000 peer-reviewed journals and some trade journals are in there. But in some subject areas like mathematics, physics, engineering, subject fields like that, actually most of the output is not in the journals, but in a different source type, conferences. So therefore we also do cover conferences, and almost 8 million conference items are included in Scopus. Then for subject fields like arts and humanities and social sciences, there the most publications are not in journals or conferences, but in books, and therefore we also cover these quite extensively in Scopus. And right now we have more than 135 book publications in Scopus as well. So when we talk about Scopus and the 65 million items that we have in the database, they're not all coming from the BRICS countries, obviously. So we do have a process of adding new content to the Scopus database, and here you can see a large set of data from all of the countries coming from BRICS and emerging economies, and a number of titles that have been reviewed, and a number of titles that have been accepted from these countries. From left to right, the countries with the most titles reviewed to the countries with fewer titles reviewed. And in orange, you can see the actual acceptance rate. India, Russia, and Brazil are the ones that for which we reviewed the most titles and accepted the most titles. But you can also see South Africa around midway on this slide. Those are the titles that have been reviewed and accepted for Scopus. In blue, you can see the titles that we currently have in Scopus from these countries. And there you can see that we have almost 6,000 titles from BRICS and emerging economy countries in Scopus today. And when you look at the orange numbers, it's about 1,200 journals that we have added in the last 5 years from these countries alone. So there's a lot of content coming from these emerging economies and BRIC countries, but not all of that content is being published in these journals from these countries. It is actually published also in international journals. I'll go to that later on, but first I'd like to tell a little bit more about the change in methodology. Here I'm giving some data from what we have done in 2016 to 17 to 2015 and 16. And there you can see that the threshold that we used for the bibliometric data was 200 in 2015 and now is decreased to 150 items per year per university as a threshold. Another change that we have done is the kilo paper. And the kilo papers are papers with 1,000 authors on them, so that is a result of large collaborations. They were excluded in the 2015 rankings. In the 2016 rankings, they are reintroduced, but we use fractional counting. So part of the credit of that paper is accredited to all of the institutions that have participated in those papers. Then suspended titles, and these are titles that we have covering in the Scopus database. I'll go over it a little bit later on. The article types. So we used to cover articles, review papers, and conference papers for the rankings only. From 2016 onwards, we also add book items and book chapters. So it comes down to 200 institutions in 2015, and now 300 institutions included in the rankings and the bibliometric data for 2016. So about the suspended titles. So in Scopus, I've already shown you, we add new titles every year. New titles are being reviewed and accepted. But once those titles are included in the Scopus database, some of those titles may not perform as we would expect. Therefore, we now have a mechanism to flag these titles and have them reviewed again by the Content Selection Advisory Board, who makes decisions about which journals to include in Scopus or not. There are three ways of flagging these titles. Either it is concerns that we received from customers or from people like you. Then there is an indication of poor performing journals according to some metrics. And then there is an indication of outlier performance using a tool that we call a radar. Based on that, we flag journals. These are reviewed by the CSAB, the Content Selection Advisory Board, and they make a decision about content curation to include those titles in Scopus or not. So for 2015, we have cancelled about 1,000 titles, 100 titles, that's quite a difference. And in 2016, again, we are working on looking at evaluating journals in the Scopus database. There's about 300 of those being identified. Of those, we expected about half of them will be cancelled for next year. So going back to all the data that we have in Scopus and the data that we are going to use or have been using for the Times Higher Education ranking. In total, almost 66 million items in Scopus. For the time frame that we are looking at here, 2011-2015, there's a bit more than 13 million items in the Scopus database. When you look at all the countries, BRICS and emerging economies, it comes down to a little bit over 5 million items. Then when you filter for the document types that are in scope for the rankings, then it's reducing to 4.8 million items, and then removing the suspended titles from the bibliometric data, you end up with 4.6 million items. So 4.6 million items in total. You can see on the top here the distribution between the article, review, conference papers and the books and the chapters. So the books and the chapters is 77,000 items that we have in Scopus. Countries, 50 of those are now included with bibliometric data. China is the largest country with almost 2 million items. In total, 300 institutions are included in this data. There's one item in the database and included in the ranking that has over 9,000 citations, and that is coming from a research group of the National University of Taiwan. The University of Sao Paulo is the institute with the most items in this ranking exercise, and I also put some statistics on the University of Johannesburg since we are here. So a little bit over 5,000 items from University of Johannesburg are included in the calculation of the rankings. So that's it, what I would like to say about the bibliometric data. Back to you.
Thank you very much. So it is an extraordinarily vast database that we're able to draw upon from Elsevier. In the actual world rankings, we actually look at 50 million citations to 12 million papers. It's an incredible resource. But perhaps the one that excites us a little bit more at Times Higher Education is the database we're building ourselves. We have our institutional data portal. We work with universities across the world And we've managed to gather over 2 years roughly 500,000 data points on 1,300 global universities. Duncan's team is adding to that database very, very regularly, building new metrics, gathering data globally. And one of the challenges I think we have in the emerging economies is to work harder to get more institutions from emerging economies, particularly actually from African countries, to get involved in the data sharing process to allow us to build the metrics. And just very quickly, we had our rankings audited this year. We recognized the weight placed in rankings, so we felt it was very important that our data handling processes, our actual calculations, were audited. So we brought in PricewaterhouseCoopers. We've really pioneered the independent external audit of rankings to make us more accountable. So the results of the rankings came out this morning, and Duncan and his team will talk a bit more about the actual results analysis, but I just want to summarize the world rankings. We're using 13 separate performance metrics covering the full range of a university. So those 3 sources feed into 13 individual metrics that cover the teaching environment, research, the citation analysis, the international outlook of a university, and industry income. And we can talk in detail about that methodology at any point during the next 2 days. But I think we'd like to focus more on the results analysis, the insights from the analysis in this session, given the limited time. But we have 13 indicators, and we moderate and modify that for the BRICS economies. But in terms of the global rankings, we have a situation where they are dominated by the Northern Hemisphere, particularly by the Western world. The US has 63 of the top 200 universities. The UK has 32. Many nations and the emerging economies aren't particularly well represented. But as we delve deeper into the world top 1,000, we are able to glean much deeper and better insights into emerging economies. And we've had a very, very successful year of engaging more with universities. We have 31 institutions from India who joined the world top 1,000 list this year, 27 from Brazil, 24 from Russia. It's been a very good year, but that's really allowed us in the new rankings today to get some much, much clearer insights. And I think, I just go back to the quote I used last night. It's something that's really important here, that the world rankings are there. It's absolutely correct that universities from emerging economies engage with global competition, subject themselves to those global benchmarks. Max Price from UCT talked about the fact it's essential that universities in Africa, in developing countries, benchmark themselves properly against the very best in the world. Particularly, we worked with the British Council. Halima Begum, who was the head of the Asia region, talked about rankings actually perhaps are more important in developing nations, outweighing their importance in the advanced economies. She talked about policymakers across Asia placing far more store in universities and the crucial role they can play in driving national growth and competitiveness. So we believe very strongly that the rankings game is absolutely appropriate for emerging economies, but we want to work in context. We want to put the data in the right context and allow you more control over that data and to recognize different missions and the diversity of the community. So that's one of the reasons why we conceived the BRICS and emerging economies ranking. This was the founding statement when we came up with the idea back in 2013. It's like switching off all electric lights to see the rising stars in the sky. And that's what the ranking today, I think, is about. Looking at your institutions in a closer context, in a more appropriate context. So really, we're looking at the 50 universities classified by FTSE as advanced emerging, secondary emerging, and frontier. That's 50 countries. Within our top 300 ranking, we actually have 41 countries represented. So an incredibly diverse array of excellence is reflected in this ranking. The countries in black are the ones that we haven't yet managed to see entering the BRICS ranking, but we're looking to really capture the diversity across these developing nations. In terms of the methodology, it is the same 13 metrics we use for the world ranking, so we're applying exactly the same rigorous, robust, global standards to these universities, but we've slightly adjusted the methodology to reflect different perspectives. The citation indicator is reduced down to 20%. We've increased the indicator that looks at your industry engagement because of the role universities play in economic growth. So we've made some slight adjustments, but you're being judged exactly against the same standards that we judge all universities in the world rankings. I released and revealed the top 10 last night in a very exciting evening context, but that's a reminder. China is utterly dominating the top 10, but it is a diverse mix. We have Moscow State in third. Cape Town is South Africa's leading institution, of course, holding fourth place. But the rise of China is an incredible lesson, I think, for the power of universities in driving economic growth, and also the opportunities that are there when governments make a firm commitment to their universities as powerhouses of national development. Looking right across the list, as I say, 41 universities represented. China has almost 1 in 6 of those universities in our top 352 institutions. India doing remarkably well with 27, Brazil 25, Taiwan 25, Russia 24, Turkey 16, the Czech Republic 12. I could go on. That's all available in the printed publication you have, and I think what's more important for this session is we get more into the detail of the data that isn't published and to reveal some exclusive findings for your institutions. So this is the perfect moment to hand over back to Duncan, who has done some development from our data points product to give you some unique insights. Do you need this?
I'll risk it. Thank you. So just as a reminder, this is the methodology outline for the BRICS. And as you can see, it has 5 major areas: teaching, research, citations, international outlook, and industry relations. When we look at the methodology for the world university rankings, teaching and research stay the same, but citations grows from 20% to 30%, international outlook drops from 10% to 7.5%, and industry drops from 10% to 2.5%. But what I'm going to look at now is the data that underlies those 5 broad pillars, the 13 metrics that Phil very briefly touched upon. And I'm going to look at them independent of the proportions that they represent in the overall rankings. And when I do this, this will enable us to have a look at how the BRICS universities perform in each of those individual metrics. So here we have some box and whisker plots of the BRICS and emerging economy universities. So what we can see as dots are the top 20 BRICS and emerging economy universities, and the box and whisker plots themselves represent the distribution of all 300 universities within that group. So for those of you who aren't familiar with box and whiskers plots, essentially think of them as a way of looking down on top of a distribution. So the line, I'm going to risk a laser, yep. The line in the middle represents the median value. The box represents the top 25th, the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile, and the whiskers represent the long tails of the distribution. Traditionally, they go to the nearest data point to 1.5 times the interquartile range, as I'm sure Phil would be happy to explain to you in the break. So what can we see from this? Well, some of the things that leap out at me from this, having looked at the distribution of all universities in the World University Ranking, is actually that BRICS universities are not that different as a group. If you look at all of the BRICS universities, there are some that have exceptional performance in almost every single metric, and there are some that are performing less well. And that isn't perhaps surprising, because there are, in fact, when you think about the BRICS, it is grouping together a number of very distinct traditions. So the Asian tradition, the African tradition, even within Africa, sub-Saharan Africa versus North Africa, and the Arabic tradition there. Eastern Europe, the former communist states, Russia, very, very different traditions, histories, and excellences. And when you blend them across, you don't necessarily see very distinctive things for the whole group. Nevertheless, what you can spot is one of the fundamental challenges, I think, that still exists. And that is that however much we might like to pretend that universities are about equality and fairness, money matters. And the amount of finance available to the BRICS universities and the emerging economy universities is still lower than that available, particularly in North America. One of the universities that always does best across all measure you like to put together is Harvard. Harvard has an endowment of about $37 billion. It's incredible to think that it has so much money that it could pay all of the fees for all of its students for the rest of time out of that money. Even Donald Trump can't stop that. So what else can we see here? Well, actually, one of the other things that is actually noticeable about the BRICS and emerging economy universities is around the international area, and particularly international co-authorship. This seems to be an area, and as we explored with a group of African universities yesterday, this is an area that we see as a significant strength of the emerging economies and BRICS players. And this is the world distribution. So you can see that things shifted a bit. Generally, things moved upwards, particularly around citations and institutional income. But let's think in a little bit more detail about one of the more almost problematic areas, reputation. And this is the front cover of the Times Higher Education, I think, when we launched the first ever separate reputation ranking. As just as an example of how rapidly reputation can change, there's an article there on London School of Economics and their somewhat challenging relationship with Libya. The difficulty with reputation is that although it's subjective, and I would argue, by the way, as a data scientist, that most data is more subjective than you might think, although it is subjective, it is still incredibly important. So what can we learn about reputation from our survey? Well, the first thing to say is that when you focus on the universities that do the very best in terms of reputation, in this case I will pick on Cambridge, a university I have been aware of in the past. The top universities around the world get reputation from all across the world. Cambridge University gets many votes from Asia and North America. Harvard, by the way, gets more votes from Asia than it does from the USA. Now, that's partly because there are more voters in Asia than in the USA. But nevertheless, this is something that we see consistently across the top universities. They are truly international brands. However, when we start to look at even the leading universities within the BRICS and emerging economies, we see a very different pattern. If we look, for example, at the Indian Institute of Science, most of its support comes from Asia. Chinese universities, most of their support comes from Asia. Russian universities, most of their support comes from Russia. There's a slight surprise here to me when I looked at this. Cape Town is actually doing surprisingly well in terms of its support from Europe. But we also see that universities don't have consistent reputation when you look at subjects. They do have distinct patterns of acknowledged expertise. Just looking at the top 6 universities in the world, here's Harvard. You can see its focus is on political health, reputation is. I look at MIT, much more towards engineering and computer science. Stanford, the bottom of the valley, big focus on computer science. Cambridge, which seems to mysteriously have changed colour from purple to yellow there, whatever its colour is. Focus on the arts. Now, this is a question I always ask to my audience. Some of you have heard this question before, so no cheating. For those of you who haven't heard this question before, do you think Oxford looks similar to Cambridge or different from Cambridge? If you think it looks similar, please raise your hands. Cheating. If you think it looks different, please raise your hands. I think that's about 3 to 1 in favour of difference. And what this tells us is that Cambridge and Oxford spend more of their time trying to convince us of their differences than they do on actual research. Because when you look at the data, people perceive them as being excellent in almost exactly the same areas. But then finally, we see Berkeley with a very rounded reputation. When we look at BRICS universities, actually we see again a mix of subjects, but when we look at individual BRICS universities, in this case I'm just choosing Peking and Sao Paulo, we see that actually they have their own distinct shapes. And typically what we see in Asian universities, by the way, is a heavy focus or heavy reputational presence around engineering and physical sciences. When we look at universities in Africa, we see a heavy focus around life sciences and clinical and health. But another interesting thing that we're able to pull out is the difference in internal reputation, how you're seen in your own country and how you're seen outside your country. And these things give us other opportunities for trying to understand how we can improve the visibility and the reputation of our universities. So the final two slides I will leave you with before I hand back to Phil are looking at what we strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat matrix. In this case, the vertical axis represents citation performance. I've got that one around. Reputational performance, vertical axis, reputation. Horizontal axis, citation. If you're in the top right, you're performing well in terms of your reputation and your citations. That is a clear strength. If you're in the bottom left, you're doing less well in terms of both citation and reputation, but they match. So that's a weakness. There are two interesting areas. Threats. Areas where your reputation exceeds your citation performance. As my marketing director would put it, evidence of a great PR team. And at the other end, we have opportunities. Areas where reputation hasn't yet caught up with the citation performance. And that's an opportunity to shine. I chose to look at computer science because this is an area where we see quite close, not for everyone, but a fairly good follow up the line where citation and reputations seem to be roughly corresponding. But if we look at arts and humanities, we see a very different picture, where there is a clear disjoint between the reputations that people have and the strengths of their citations. And this was just for a select few universities from the BRICS, the EU group, to give you an idea of some of the challenges that are facing universities around the world. One final slide. This is a new one. We've been trying to explore something slightly different. And what this particular chart does is it tries to compare the actual wealth of a nation, the GDP per capita in purchase price parity terms, against the average score of the universities within our rankings. And the size of the bubble, this is for entire country systems, the size of the bubble represents the proportion of university-age people in that country who attend one of the ranked universities. So the limitation, caveat here, the limitation is if we don't have many ranked universities from a country, that bubble may appear inappropriately small. But nevertheless, we start to see some differences. I've highlighted a few different nations here. The colours represent different continents. In purple, we have Europe. What we can see there is clearly on the right-hand side, not only are the countries wealthier, but they also seem to have adopted a policy of mass participation. We see this a lot. The idea that it's not sufficient to be a country with a small number of people who go to the best universities. We need all of our, or 50% of our population to go to universities. Turkey is another good example of that, where they have massive universities. I think the biggest university they have has 300,000 undergraduates. It's a huge endeavour. Then we have other approaches, and this is partly following funding. So in the case of, and also the size of the country to be fair, Russia and China are areas where there is a huge amount of funding. Well, China certainly, Russia there is a significant amount of funding. Don't want to overstate that. But it's focused on the top universities. And I'm not saying that that's a right or wrong way of doing it, but it does start to show up in the data. If you want to put all of your money into your top universities, what impact does that have on the rest of your universities? And that's a very interesting thing that we're going to start exploring in the future, but hopefully this chart starts to give us some insight into how that's going. But with that, I'm going to hand back to Lynn, who's going to take us through a little bit more of Elsevier's data.
I'd like to do something similar that you did with the reputation and other metrics that are used for the ranking. I would like to focus on the bibliometric data. First of all, I'd like to show you something from the World University Rankings, and the difference or the correlation between the ranking positions in 2015 and 16. So on the horizontal axis, you can see the citation score for 2015, and on the vertical axis, you can see the citation score for 2016. And overall, with a few outliers here and there, like over here and over here, the correlation actually is quite strong. 96%, can you see when you look at the actual data. So this shows that even though there were differences in the methodology to calculate the citation score, actually the difference in the ranking is not so much. Then when you do a similar kind of thing with the BRICS and emerging economy rankings, then the picture completely changes. Here you can actually see again the citation score. Oh, go back. Citation score in 2015 and the citation score in 2016, where there's basically no correlation between the two. So that we have been thinking about what could be the reasons. So one of the reasons could be the changes that we have done in the calculation of the citation score. For example, excluding the suspended titles from the 2016 citation score. But also in general, when you think about the institutions that are here on this slide plotted against the universities that were plotted on the...
Sorry, technical issue. Apparently the lapel mics are working now, so for sound it's best to... Is this true? Do we believe you?
Can you hear me now? Yes, I think you can, right? Okay. Well, I have free hands now. So we were talking about the change from 2015 to 2016 for the BRICS and emerging economies citation score. And one of the reasons of the difference could be the changes in the methodology, such as excluding the suspended titles and adding the books, for example. But the other thing is the whole nature of these institutions that we have in the rankings for BRICS and economies compared to the World University rankings. These universities are moving quite a lot. They might increase their outputs, they might change in the citation score, and therefore, and also their competitors are moving a lot. And therefore there is quite less correlation between the scores from 2015 and 16 compared to the World University rankings. Obviously, when you're over here, the citation score in 2015 was much higher than it was in 2016, so there you don't want to be. But probably universities over here, these are the ones that benefit most in 2016. And on the next slide, I've shown you the top 20 upmovers that have an increased citation score compared to 2015 rankings. In orange, you can see the actual ranking positions in the BRICS and in emerging economies THE ranking for this year. You can see the names of the different universities plotted next to the bubble. And the bubble size is the actual level of international collaboration. And there you can see, actually there's one university that is highest over here, United Arab Emirates University, which is ranked 57. So that university really benefited this year and increased quite a lot and has a high field-weighted citation impact and therefore citation score. But when you look at overall at the countries, here you can see which are the countries that have benefited most. And there you can see that actually Brazil and Chile, as respect to size, have benefited most in 2016 with the improved citation score that we see for these universities. Now I'd like to go over a little bit more detail of the top 20 universities in the BRICS and EE ranking for this year. You can see here the top 10 universities, and I've included also University of Johannesburg in here for comparison. And there you can see here the publication year on the horizontal axis and the scholarly outputs, so the number of documents that have been produced by these universities on the vertical axis. You can see that the most prolific universities that are also highly ranked are the ones from China. You can see number 10, which is National Taiwan University, right in the middle with still a substantial amount of outputs. Russia, Moscow State University is right here, and the South African universities are at the bottom with respect to the output, so the number of documents that they have produced in the time period for which we have calculated the Times Higher ranking for 2015. So that is the output, and in this slide, I'll show you the scholarly output versus the field-weighted citation impact, or in other words, the citation score. And there you can see it is a different picture, with the South African universities actually with the higher citation scores, Cape Town over here, Witwatersrand over here, and University of Johannesburg over here. And you can see actually the university that has the highest outputs, Cy Young University over here. It has one of the lowest field-weighted citation impact of these 10 top universities. So there you can see that although the scholarly output may be high, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a high citation impact. And the citation impact is also related to the international collaboration. And that's why the bubble size in this graph, you can see the actual level of collaboration. And there you can see that the biggest bubbles are actually from those universities in the top left of the graph, so the South African universities that have the highest international collaboration and also the highest field-weighted citation impact and therefore citation score. I'll go more over this in the keynote later today, but now I'd like to hand over back to Phil, I think, to conclude this session.
Thank you very much indeed. Am I on? Mike Wise? Yes. So I think I just wanted to make one final point actually before we open it up to Q&A. And Q&A is very, very important to us. But one of the things we're trying to do at Times Higher Education is move beyond rankings to go much deeper. And something I just wanted to highlight for this group, and I think you've received a copy of Times Higher Education magazine in your delegate packs, but we developed an analysis looking at specific countries. It's something that keeps coming up, moving from ranking individual institutions to looking at countries. And we did some work, Duncan's team did some work around identifying countries with particularly strong potential in higher education, looking purely at data, tertiary enrollment ratios growing, the overall participation rates, the growth of those participation rates, working with Elsevier, looking at publications per 10,000 people, looking at the publication impact. So I just wanted to urge you to have a look at that piece of work. And really, we identified what we describe as the tactics. We think, BRICS is probably a slightly anachronistic term now, specifically in terms of when it was first conceived. The changing geopolitical situation and demographic situation means perhaps the BRICS aren't necessarily all poised in the same way. But looking entirely at higher education and higher education potential, we actually believe Thailand, Argentina, Chile, Turkey, Iran, Colombia, and Serbia are really exciting hot countries to watch. But we don't need to discuss that now. It was more just to suggest we explore that in a bit more detail through conversations and throughout the rest of the summit. So that actually ends the formal presentation. I think it's very important now that we open the floor to conversation. We have two of the leading data specialists, two of the people who fuel the Times Higher Education rankings, the BRICS rankings. So please do ask away. We have a question at the front here.
I'm Alexei from Novosibirsk State University. My question is for Wim. Thank you for very big set of data, very interesting set of data. Maybe you know that absolute value of citation per university do not change much from year to year, maybe 10%, maybe 20%. However, we see from your data that citation score, which is calculated from this data, changes very much, sometimes several times. So how can you explain it?
Yes, I am. The actual citation score that you will see for the rankings is not exactly the same as what you would see in the Scopus database, because actually it is a percentage of the total of the citation scores. So the citation scores are not exactly the same as a field-weighted citation impact that's been used to feed the actual ranking itself. So it is true that citations may not change much because it is a time period of 5 years that we are using. And if in 1 year there's more citations for a particular article that was not in the previous period, that only has like a small effect on the total amount of citations. But still, it is the trend that you can see using that rolling rolling window of years that we are following that comes to the field-weighted citation impact. And then it's changed to a scale of the percentages, and that is actually the citation score itself.
I think if I can add to that, one of the things that we have noticed, particularly when we looked at the Latin American ranking, and we reduced the threshold for entrance, which is 1,000 papers for the World University Ranking, we reduced that to 500. We noticed considerably more variability on a year-on-year basis for universities with fewer publications, and that's not surprising. That's a standard statistical sampling kind of challenge. So Sao Paulo University, which has 20,000 odd publications, had a very smooth, steady increase. Other universities which were smaller had much more variability. And I suspect we'll see the same in the World University Rankings, because you say that things don't change very much, but if you've been involved in a significant collaboration that published in 2011, so last year it was in, and next year it won't be in, that could have a big impact. So there are some reasons for variability, and the final one, which Wim did touch on, but I don't think put quite enough emphasis on, we Z-score. And Z-scoring is based on your population. In the last 3 years, we've gone from 400 universities in 2015 through to 800 universities in the 2016 rankings, and now in the 2017 rankings, we have 980 universities. And that change itself has impacted the scores. Now, next year, we don't plan to go beyond 1,000. At the moment, I'm seeing if my boss is in the audience with a new number, but we don't plan to go beyond 1,000. So that should increase the stability on a year-on-year basis.
Thank you. Any more questions? Can we get a mic to the lady?
I'll have this question and then we'll go to you.
Thank you. My name is Nyarech Banda from Midland State University in Zimbabwe. And my question is, are there other reasons that you seclude some universities apart from the research output? Because we are looking at countries like where I come from, Zimbabwe. We have never been ranked in the Times Higher Education, but we feel we have some universities that are doing very well in terms of research output, international outlook, collaborations. But even if you check on Scopus, we have some universities that have over 5,000 publications, like for example, the University of Zimbabwe. But in terms of ranking, we have never been featured.
So I think this one comes back to me again. There are 4 criteria for entry in the World University Ranking. And for those of you who've done physical chemistry, I will do them in law of thermodynamic order. So first law is the 1,000 scholarly papers that Wim described over a 5-year period. We used to have a strict limit of 200 per year minimum, but we've lowered that to 150 per year as long as the total is more than 1,000. The second is that we require universities to be specialists in more than a single area. So we require them to cover at least 2 of the 8 broad subject areas we deal with. The third law is that we require them to teach at an undergraduate level as well and offer undergraduate degrees. And then we have the zero flaw, because having said all of those, there is one overriding thing that is important. We gather data directly from universities. And so for those of you who are involved in that data collection process, I put on my record now my deep and sincere thanks for the time you spent doing that. I appreciate it isn't straightforward or simple. But because we rely on that data from institutions, the only way you can be part of the ranking is if you agree to participate and you submit your data. And we would love to have universities from Zimbabwe involved. So if you come and talk to me at the end, we will make sure that your details are in the system and we can start gathering that data if you're willing to give us it.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. I think it's very important to stress that actually we are looking to deepen and enrich our existing database. So Duncan's email is there. We can
That's my Twitter handle.
Oh, we've got both. So we can deepen our relationships with individual universities, build a deeper and richer database, which then allows us to produce bespoke analyses, different types of metrics for different institutions. We have a question here, and then we'll get a mic to you over in a moment. So.
Thank you very much, Chair. The name is Rudy Peterson, and I'm here from UJ, the South African Orange Planet University. I want to check, I think I sound like a stuck record. I reflected on this as well last year. I know this may not be the appropriate forum, We're dealing with BRICS here. But I want to check my comment particularly, and then I've got a question, is on the relationship between the Global Competitiveness Index report, which deals with countries' GDP, and I think, Phil, you touched on it. I wanted to end off with that question in terms of the final thoughts, your final thoughts on the relationship between GDP, a country's GDP, and the size and impact of university rankings. So, Phil, I appreciate your comment. But coming back to my comment, it seems to me we're dealing with global competitiveness here, but I think the comment last year was over and above BRICS. Is competitiveness university rankings, particularly in Africa, in terms of GDP, and also the relationship between GDP and countries and university rankings. I'm interested particularly in Africa, as well. Then the other part that I don't pick up here is the impact. You talk about citations and research, etc. But there's also the other element of impact of universities in terms of new ventures, patents, what the university produces, and its impact in the economy. And I'm interested particularly at the role of universities in regional economic development. How does that play out? Are other regions having rankings in university perhaps much more impact in terms of that region, and perhaps comment on the GDP per region and per university? I'd like your comment on that. And impact, yeah, I think that covers the point. I'm looking forward to your response. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of the GDP situation, obviously, the world rankings have a kind of brutal honesty about them, that it's a global talent pool, it's a global world. We're sharing common research problems, so we do, accept that there's a challenge there, that wealth plays a huge role in determining success and allowing universities to flourish and to attract the best talent. So there's a kind of brutal reality around the world rankings. I mean, we do apply purchasing price parity to try and reflect the different strengths of economies, but at the end of the day, the global ranking, it's a global competition, and we're putting people on equal footing. But I think one of the things we want to achieve as an organization is more context, and that's one of the reasons why we produce this BRICS and Emerging Economies ranking, is to put the universities in a more a clearer group of peers in terms of the resources available to them. Even within that, there's still quite significant variation. So I think the idea for us really is to try and provide lots of additional analyses, different outputs to reflect those different challenges and different missions.
I think you've highlighted one of the classic challenges of trying to measure across borders, which is finding a metric which is consistent. And when it comes to societal impact, or even economic impact, actually finding measures that are consistent across different countries is difficult. You talked about patents. The world's patent system is not coherent. The way that patents are treated in different parts of the world is, although there are efforts to try and make this more consistent, is certainly not there yet. And indeed, if you look at some of the areas where there is the most patent activity around pharmaceuticals, it's very hit and miss. You can have a fantastic 10-year research project that fails in stage 3 trials and gets nowhere. Or you can have one that is hugely profitable, or hugely profitable for reasons you don't see when you market the drug initially. So it's a challenge, but we do think there are opportunities there, particularly when we look at more localized or regionalized analysis. So we had a great discussion over lunch yesterday, and one of the things that was raised specifically around Africa was, is it possible to measure intra-Africa collaboration? And I think actually there are opportunities there directly within the citations database to do that. To what extent are African universities collaborating with other African universities? So it's not just Harvard coming in or Cambridge coming in, it's actually a groundswell of activity here within Africa. So I think that's where we have to go, and I apologize that that's a brief answer to your very detailed question.
Which actually leads me to a perfect plug. We are dedicating an entire summit to the issue of social and economic impact in Hong Kong in June, we're having our first ever Impact and Innovation Summit, where we can actually try and grapple with some of these questions. Can we get meaningful metrics that we can apply to recognize impact? You know, beyond the scholarly impact we see through the citation analysis, can we see societal impact and economic impact? So we're recognizing the challenge and we're trying to rise to the challenge. I think there's two mics.
Can I add a little bit to that? With the metric itself, it may not be specifically the metrics that you are looking at, but I think it is important to realize that there is no one metric that gives the complete answer. Not for that specific thing that you're looking at, but also not across the borders like Duncan was exploring. So therefore, I think what is very strong about the THC ranking is that it is combined with also qualitative measures as well. So it's not only the metrics itself that come to this ranking, it is in combination with the qualitative survey that comes in the end to the final ranking itself. So there you can combine it, and therefore a little bit less focus on the metric itself, and there are multiple ways of having impact than just the one we were doing.
So I think we are short of time. We've overran. So we have two mics already at the back, I believe. We'll take two questions at once, and then we'll come to you for the final questions.
Thank you. My name is Will Cross from the Al-Mazrui Center for Higher Education Studies here at the University of Johannesburg. My question actually was related to the question raised by the colleague from Zimbabwe. And I would like to suggest to the chair that if you can take more than one question because they may be related. At the last summit in Beijing, also BRICS summit, a vice chancellor from India asked the question that wasn't actually answered. Show me the bag of cash. I guess he was referring to the value added for the rankings. And I don't know what would be your promise to those African countries that are not represented and they're not engaging in this process. What kind of value do you think they would obtain, given the fact that they may be grappling or completely swamped by their own problems? My second question is about the BRICS. Do you think that the BRICS countries should have their own ranking system? And why?
Thank you very much. I think because of the time, we'll take another question from here and we can address them in one final wrap-up, if we can get the mic.
Thank you very much. My name is Kayo Sebero from University of Nigeria. We've been made to understand here that we use Scopus as the database for the collection of data. And I'm wondering why some other platforms like Google Scholar and ResearchGate are not involved. Secondly, some universities that are not ranked would have expected to know why they were not ranked. They should be able to see their strengths and weaknesses once the result of the ranking is out. What do you think about that?
Okay, a few issues there. Duncan, do you want to talk money? And where are the bags of cash?
Where are the bags of cash? This is a question around the world. So in terms of what is the value added for universities in joining the system? Visibility. And if you are truly playing on a world stage, particularly around research, then that is what the rankings are focusing on. Less so in terms of teaching, because inevitably it's very challenging to measure teaching across borders and the effectiveness of teaching, although we have some plans in motion around that. I think, and related to that, there are some very interesting attempts to actually look at value-added measures, but then you have to ask this question about who are you trying to be fair to? Are you trying to be fair and provide information for students, or are you trying to equalize the universities? We could produce a ranking, for example, where we normalize by the revenue or the money available to the university, effectively measured the most effective university. But that would be a very different thing. It wouldn't necessarily be a worse thing or a better thing, it would just be different. So those are some of my initial thoughts on that. I think there was another...
I mean, I think that given the time constraints that covers it, I mean, maybe I'll give Wim the one of the easiest questions or one of the most PR opportunities. Why Scopus rather than Google Scholar or ResearchGate?
Yeah, obviously Scopus is not the only database with bibliometric information available. But I do think why the decision has been made to go for Scopus and not for a database like Google Scholar, which is much broader, but much less controlled. So Scopus has a very strict mechanism of including new content to the database, but also what I described like suspending titles that we think are not of a certain quality level anymore. So that kind of curation process is not in place for a database like Google Scholar, but still Scopus has a very broad coverage, as I tried to show you with the number of titles that we do have from the BRIC and economies available in the database. So it's a bit of a compromise, and we are quite happy that THE has decided that the compromise that we have made with Scopus is good for the rankings as the source for bibliometric data. But yes, there are different sources available.
I would say finally on Google Scholar, it is fundamentally totally opaque. I can't even tell how many publications there are on Google Scholar. There have been some estimates, but the estimates are rather like predicting the US presidential election.
And I think finally the question around information for universities not ranked. I think this is a very important part of Times Higher Education's development. I mean, as Duncan said, we have a situation where you can't be ranked unless you're an active participant in the data exchange process. You have to join our portal and take part. I think we are very keen to push out and deepen that database. Of course, we will never rank more than 1,000 in the world, but we could certainly build lots of different analyses and metrics around different types of mission. So we'd urge everyone to get into the system. And I think our responsibility is once you're in the system, even if you're not in the overall world rankings or you fall out of various rankings for whatever criteria, we do have a responsibility to offer you opportunities to look at the metrics that are relevant to you. So I think we are developing a whole range of interfaces and products that would allow universities to sort of start monitoring their performance even outside the official rankings. So our kind of pact would be if you get involved, if you share your data, we'll do everything we can to share insights back with you relevant to your own mission. And that's a very important message, I think, for this meeting is the more cooperation we have, the more data sharing, the more we can improve the relationship we have with individual universities. So I think we've overrun. I think we all deserve a break. So I think if we could just thank Duncan and Wim for their contributions.
Thank you.